Sarah Jane Parker had dreamed of this moment for as long as she could remember, standing on a stage, her voice climbing the charts and her name echoing across the world. Today, that dream felt closer than ever. 3,000 hopeful artists flooded the Metropolitan Arena, each one carrying the same fragile mix of confidence and fear. They had come to audition before a panel few could rival. Jennifer Gomez, Dietrick Almond, Braxton, and Adrianna Latte, musical powerhouses whose voices, records, and influence had shaped generations. For Sarah Jane, this wasn't just another audition. This was the day everything could change. "Number 2896, please come forward," the announcer called, his voice echoing through the vast Metropolitan Arena. Sarah Jane's breath caught. That was her number. The crowd seemed to blur as she rose from her seat, legs unsteady but determined. The low hum of whispered prayers, nervous laughter, and quiet rehearsals faded with every step she took toward the stage. Thousands of eyes followed her, but all she could feel was the weight of a dream she had carried her entire life. As she reached the center of the stage, the lights flared, momentarily blinding her. Beyond them sat Jennifer Gomez, Dietrick Almond, Braxton, and Adrianna Latte, faces she had seen on album covers and award shows, now studying her in silence. "State your name," the announcer said gently. Sarah Jane swallowed, lifted the microphone, and spoke. Her voice trembled at first, the weight of the moment pressing hard against her chest. Then she took a deep breath, slow, steady, and grounded herself. With a soft smile, she stated her name, lifting her gaze to meet each judge in turn. There was something quiet but assured in that glance, as if she were reminding herself, and them, that she belonged on this stage. The announcer nodded and gestured toward the band, then stepped aside. "You may begin when you're ready." A hush settled over the Metropolitan Arena, the kind that felt heavy and sacred, as if even the air knew something important was about to happen. Sarah Jane shifted her weight slightly, the stage lights warming her skin. She could hear her own heartbeat, steady now, no longer racing. Somewhere in the distance, a cough. A chair creaked. Then silence again. She leaned toward the microphone and spoke clearly. "I'll be singing My Heart Will Go On." A flicker passed across the judges' faces, recognition, curiosity, expectation. The opening notes began softly, almost reverently, the melody floating through the arena like a memory being awakened. Sarah Jane closed her eyes for just a moment, picturing the hours she had spent singing this song alone in her room, imagining an audience that had never quite felt real until now. Her first note emerged gentle and controlled, no longer trembling. It carried, not rushed, not forced, gliding across the space and settling into the ears of every listener. As she sang, her voice grew in confidence, swelling with emotion, wrapping itself around the lyrics as though they had been written just for her. Each phrase felt intentional, shaped by longing, hope, and a quiet resilience. By the time she reached the chorus, the room seemed to breathe with her. The sound soared, rich and full, filling every corner of the arena. Even the judges leaned forward now, pens forgotten, eyes fixed on the young woman who had transformed a familiar song into something achingly personal. Sarah Jane stood taller as the final note lingered in the air, letting it fade naturally into silence. When it ended, she opened her eyes, unaware that for a few suspended seconds, no one moved, because something rare had just happened. The applause burst through the unexpected silence with a thunderous roar, startling even Sarah Jane herself. It wasn't polite clapping or scattered cheers, it was a wave, sudden and overwhelming, crashing through the arena. One by one, attendees rose to their feet, then rose at a time. The sound grew louder, fuller, until it felt as though the walls themselves were vibrating. Hands clapped above heads, whistles pierced the air, and voices called out in pure admiration. Sarah Jane's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with disbelief. Her fingers curled lightly around the microphone as she looked out and saw it, the entire arena standing. Then, from the judges' table, chairs pushed back. Jennifer Gomez stood first, smiling wide, her hands clapping with unmistakable approval. Dietrick Almond followed, nodding slowly as if he were still processing what he'd just heard. Braxton rose next, laughing softly and shaking his head in awe. Adrianna Latte stood last, one hand pressed to her heart, eyes bright. Their smiles met Sarah Jane's, and in that moment she felt it, something had shifted. This was no longer just an audition. This was recognition. The arena was on its feet, and so was her dream. The competition was stiff, filled with voices just as hungry and talented as her own. Yet even so, many of her fellow contestants smiled, clapped, and cheered her on as she stepped off the stage. There was respect in their eyes, an unspoken acknowledgement that they had just witnessed something special. Sarah returned their smiles, her heart full and steady. She knew the road ahead would only get harder, but she also knew this. She belonged here. During the final break of the day, as the arena slowly emptied and the echoes of music faded into quiet chatter, Sarah Jane stood near the wings of the stage, replaying the moment in her mind. Her hands still trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the magnitude of what had just begun. Sarah Jane. She turned to see Dietrick Almond approaching her, his presence calm but commanding. Up close, he carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime listening closely, to voices, to spirit, to possibility. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said with a warm smile. "Not at all," she replied quickly, straightening without realizing it. Dietrick nodded thoughtfully. "I wanted to speak with you before the day ended. I've heard a lot of voices in my career, good ones, great ones, but yours," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "has richness. Depth. Something that can't be taught." Sarah Jane felt her breath catch. "As a gospel artist and producer," he continued, "I listen for voices that carry both power and purpose. When you sang today, I heard control, emotion, but more than that, I heard truth. That kind of sound doesn't come around often." He leaned in just slightly, lowering his voice. "Finals are still ahead, and the competition is fierce. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say this now. I'm interested in your talent. Very interested. I'd like to talk about working together. Before the finals even come around." For a moment, Sarah Jane couldn't speak. The arena, the judges, the applause, it all rushed back to her at once. She nodded slowly, a smile spreading across her face as the weight of his words settled in. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. This day had already changed her life. Dietrick noticed the pause, the careful way Sarah Jane held herself, not swept away by excitement, but weighing every word. He respected that. Instead of pressing forward, he softened his stance, grounding the moment. "I imagine today has been overwhelming," he said. "Applause, attention, expectations all at once." Sarah Jane nodded. "It feels like everything changed in a single hour." He smiled knowingly. "That's exactly when the wrong people rush in. I don't want to be one of them." That caught her attention. "I've spent years as a gospel artist and producer," Dietrick continued. "And gospel teaches you something the industry often forgets. Your voice isn't just a skill. It's an assignment. It needs care, direction, and protection." Sarah Jane folded her arms lightly, listening. "When you sang today, I heard more than range and control. I heard restraint, discernment. You didn't oversing. You trusted the moment. That tells me you're not chasing applause, you're building something." "I don't want to lose who I am," she said quietly. "That's exactly why I came to you," Dietrick replied without hesitation. "I work with artists who want longevity, not quick wins. I focus on vocal development, sound identity, and purpose, so when opportunity comes, you're ready and rooted." He pulled a simple card from his pocket and held it between his fingers. "I'm not asking you to decide anything now," he said. "Finals are ahead, and more voices will call your name. All I want is a conversation offstage, away from the noise. If we work together, it will be about growth, not pressure." Sarah Jane took the card, feeling its weight despite its simplicity. "I'll think about it," she said. Dietrick nodded. "That's the right answer." As he walked away, Sarah Jane looked down at his name, realizing that the most important audition might be the one she never sang, but the path she chose next. Jennifer had been watching from a distance. She stood near the judge's table, arms loosely crossed, her expression unreadable at first. But when she saw Dietrick approach Sarah Jane, saw the way he spoke with calm intention, the way Sarah listened closely, her brow tightened into a frown. Jennifer knew that look. It was the look of a producer making a move. Her eyes followed Dietrick as he handed Sarah a card, lingering just a second longer than professional courtesy required. Jennifer exhaled slowly through her nose. She respected Dietrick's ear and his gospel roots, but she also understood the game, and timing like that was never accidental. "Interesting," she murmured under her breath. Sarah Jane was special. That much was clear. Jennifer had heard it the moment the first note left her mouth. Voices like that didn't come often, and when they did, they attracted attention, fast and sometimes aggressively. Jennifer straightened, her frown easing into something more deliberate. Calculated. Finals hadn't even arrived yet, and already lines were being drawn. She made a quiet decision. Before anyone else tried to claim Sarah Jane's future, Jennifer intended to make sure the young artist understood all her options. By day 2, the Metropolitan Arena felt different. The electric chaos of the first day had thinned, replaced by a quieter, heavier tension. Gone were the endless lines and nervous chatter. The contestant pool was much smaller now. Only 10% of the original 3,000 had made it through. Every face carried the same unspoken truth. We're close enough to touch it now. Number 225. The announcer's voice echoed sharply in the open space, sounding louder than it had the day before. A contestant stood, shoulders squared, and made their way toward the stage. The remaining singers watched closely, not as a crowd, but as competitors who now understood exactly what was at stake. Each performance mattered more. Each mistake cost more. From the judges' table, Jennifer Gomez sat forward, eyes scanning the room between performances. Dietrick Almond was composed, unreadable. Braxton scribbled notes. Adrianna Latte listened with her eyes closed, absorbing every nuance. This round wasn't about potential anymore. It was about proof. And somewhere among the remaining voices, Sarah Jane waited, knowing that every step forward now carried the weight of destiny. Number 279. The call landed differently this time. Sarah Jane felt it in her chest before she even stood. This wasn't the nervous anticipation of day one, it was focus. Purpose. She rose slowly, smoothing her hands against her sides as the remaining contestants turned to watch. They knew her now. They remembered the night before. As she stepped onto the stage, all 4 judges leaned forward at once. Jennifer Gomez rested her elbows on the table, eyes sharp and curious. Dietrick Almond's expression was calm but intent, as though he were listening before a single note had been sung. Braxton set his pen down deliberately. Adrianna Latte tilted her head, studying Sarah Jane with quiet expectation. The lights warmed again. The room stilled. Sarah Jane adjusted the microphone and spoke clearly, her voice steady. "I'll be singing 'I Will Always Love You' by Whitney Houston." There it was, the kind of song that could make or break a career in under 4 minutes. A murmur rippled through the remaining contestants, then vanished as the opening a cappella moment approached. No band, no safety net, just her. Sarah Jane closed her eyes, and then she sang. The first note was pure, unforced, reverent, suspended in the air like a held breath. She didn't rush it. She honored the silence between phrases, letting the lyrics speak before her voice ever soared. There was restraint in her delivery, a confidence that whispered, "I know exactly what I'm holding." As the song built, so did she. Her voice expanded, not sharp, not showy, but full, controlled, and deeply emotional. When she reached the chorus, it wasn't imitation. It was interpretation. Pain softened by gratitude. Love released, not clung to. Each note carried intention, every run earned. Jennifer's frown from the day before was gone now, replaced with something closer to awe. Dietrick's jaw tightened slightly, his eyes never leaving Sarah Jane. He knew this wasn't just talent anymore. This was artistry. When Sarah Jane reached the final sustained note, she let it bloom naturally, then fall away, clean, honest, complete. Silence followed. Not because they didn't know how to respond, but because no one wanted to break what had just settled over the room again. The silence stretched, thick, deliberate, almost reverent. Then Adrianna Latte was the first to exhale. She pressed her hand to the table as if steadying herself. Braxton blinked once, slowly, then shook his head in disbelief. Dietrick leaned back in his chair, lips pressed together, eyes lifted toward the ceiling for a brief moment, as though acknowledging something bigger than the competition. Jennifer broke the quiet. "Sarah Jane," she said, her voice calm but unmistakably charged. "That was brave." The word landed with weight. "You chose a song that doesn't allow hiding," Jennifer continued. "No band, no build-up, just truth. And you didn't try to compete with history, you respected it, then made it your own." Sarah Jane nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to keep from shaking. Dietrick leaned forward now. "Yesterday I heard richness," he said. "Today I heard command. You know when to pull back. That tells me you're not just a singer, you're a listener." "That's rare," Aaron added. "Your control is exceptional, but what stood out most was your restraint. You trusted silence. Most artists are afraid of that." Adrianna smiled softly. "You made us feel something. That's the assignment." Jennifer glanced down the panel, then back at Sarah Jane. A brief pause. A breath. "Sarah Jane," she said, "you are moving forward." The words barely finished before the room erupted. Applause surged again, stronger this time, more knowing. The remaining contestants clapped with genuine admiration, some smiling, some shaking their heads as if to say, "Of course." Sarah Jane felt her chest tighten, emotion rising fast and unexpected. She bowed her head briefly, blinking back tears, then looked up and whispered, "Thank you." As she stepped off the stage, Jennifer watched her carefully. No frown now, no calculation. Just recognition. Whatever was unfolding between judges, producers, and promises behind the scenes, one thing was undeniable. Sarah Jane was no longer just surviving the competition. She was shaping it. Backstage, the air felt heavier. As Sarah Jane stepped behind the curtain, conversations stalled mid-sentence. A few contestants looked at her with open admiration, wide eyes, quiet smiles, whispered, "That was incredible." One girl reached out and squeezed her hand. Another nodded slowly, as if still replaying the performance in her head. But not all the looks were warm. Some were tight-lipped, measured, lingering just a beat too long. A hush followed her in certain corners of the room, the kind that wasn't reverence but recalculation. She caught fragments of murmured words. She sang Whitney. Of course they loved it. Did you see the judges? The praise had already begun to curdle into comparison. Sarah Jane felt it then, the shift. Awe stood on one side of the room, undeniable and sincere. But growing alongside it was jealousy, quiet, simmering, and just as present. A few contestants turned away when she passed. Others smiled without warmth, eyes sharp with the realization that the field had narrowed, and so had their chances. She kept her composure, offering polite smiles, soft thank yous. Inside, she steadied herself, remembering Dietrich's words, remembering why she had come. This was never about being liked. It was about being faithful to her gift. Backstage had become its own kind of audition. And Sarah Jane was learning that success didn't just change how the judges saw you. It changed how everyone else did, too. Jennifer found her just after the final audition of the day, tucked into a quiet corner backstage where the noise softened into a low hum. Sarah Jane was seated on a folding chair, water bottle in hand, replaying moments she couldn't yet put words to. "Mind if I sit?" Jennifer asked. Sarah Jane looked up quickly, startled, then nodded. Of course. Up close, Jennifer carried herself with an ease that came only from having survived the industry more than once. An early 2000s hip-hop icon, she had long since traded the grind of non-stop touring for a carefully chosen rhythm. 6 months a year headlining shows in Las Vegas, the other 6 living on her own terms. Fame no longer chased her, she curated it. "I won't pretend I didn't notice you," Jennifer said plainly. "You've changed the temperature of this competition." Sarah Jane smiled politely but said nothing. "I'm not a producer," Jennifer continued, anticipating the unspoken question. "I don't write contracts or lock people into deals." She paused, then added, "What I do have is access. Relationships. People who trust my judgment because I don't waste their time." She leaned forward slightly. "I've introduced talent to the entertainment world before, artists who didn't just sing well, but knew who they were. And that's what I'm interested in." Sarah Jane studied her carefully. "Why me?" Jennifer smiled, not indulgently but knowingly. "Because you don't perform like someone asking to be chosen. You perform like someone deciding whether the opportunity is worth it." That landed. "There are going to be a lot of voices around you now," Jennifer said. "Some loud, some persuasive, some well-meaning, some not. I'm not here to rush you or claim you. I just want to make sure that when doors open, and they will, you walk through the right ones." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded card, setting it on the chair between them rather than handing it over. "When you're ready," she said. "No pressure. No promises. Just conversation." Jennifer stood, giving Sarah Jane a final look, measured, respectful. "You have something real," she added. "Don't let the noise convince you otherwise." As she walked away, Sarah Jane stared at the card beside her, heart steady but mind racing. 2 judges. 2 paths. And a future that was suddenly hers to protect. By day 3, the arena carried a quieter gravity, less spectacle, more consequence. Sarah Jane felt it the moment she walked in. And then she saw them. Her parents stood near the entrance, her mother waving softly, her father's familiar posture instantly grounding. At 19, Sarah Jane had already learned how to stand on her own. She lived alone now, paid her own bills, carried her own dreams. Their presence wasn't necessary, but it was everything. Her chest tightened as she crossed the floor to them, folding easily into her mother's embrace, her father's hand resting firmly on her back. No cameras. No judges. Just home. "We didn't want to miss this," her father said quietly. That was all it took. When her number was called later that afternoon, Sarah Jane stepped onto the stage with a different resolve than before. The judges noticed immediately something had shifted. Not nerves. Not confidence. Reverence. I'll be singing the Lord's Prayer, she said. The room stilled. It was a departure, far from the pop ballads and powerhouse anthems she had delivered the previous 2 days. No sweeping production. No familiar competition-friendly arrangement. Just a sacred, disciplined piece that left no room for error. The difficulty was no less demanding. If anything, it required more control, more humility, more precision. Sarah Jane glanced briefly toward the audience, finding her father's eyes. He nodded once. Then she began. Her voice entered softly, almost conversational, each word shaped with care. She resisted the urge to embellish, letting the melody carry its own weight. The phrasing was intentional, the breath control exacting. This was not a performance meant to impress, it was an offering. As the song unfolded, the arena seemed to shrink. Every note hovered, unhurried. The power came not from volume, but from restraint. When her voice rose, it did so naturally, supported, never forced, strength wrapped in surrender. The judges didn't move. Jennifer's expression softened into something unguarded. Dietrick bowed his head slightly, eyes closed. Aaron stopped taking notes entirely. Adrianna's hands were clasped tightly together. By the final line, Sarah Jane's voice rang clear and steady, then faded gently into silence. No immediate applause followed, not because it wasn't earned, but because the room needed a moment to return to itself. Sarah Jane lowered her head, emotion steady but present. In choosing that song, she had paid homage not just to her father, but to the foundation that carried her here. And everyone in the arena felt it. However, when the applause did come, it was different. It arrived respectfully measured, less thunderous, less electric than the days before. Hands clapped throughout the arena, but without the eruption, without the roar that had once lifted her off the stage. The moment was honored, not celebrated. At the judges' table, all 4 applauded. Jennifer's smile was composed, professional. Adrianna nodded appreciatively. Aaron's clapping was steady but restrained, as though he were still evaluating rather than responding. Only Dietrick broke the pattern. He stood. His applause was firm, deliberate, unguarded, cutting through the polite protocol that seemed to settle over the room. There was no performance in it, no concern for optics. Just recognition. Sarah Jane felt the shift immediately. She bowed her head slightly, accepting the moment for what it was. This song had never been about spectacle. Still, the contrast lingered, an unspoken reminder that reverence did not always translate into enthusiasm, and courage did not always draw cheers. As she stepped off the stage, she understood something new. Not every right choice would be rewarded loudly. But some would be witnessed deeply. Like Dietrick, Sarah Jane's father did not need the crowd to tell him what he had just witnessed. He sat taller in his seat, his expression steady and unmistakably proud. His hands clapping, not loud but full. There was no comparison in his eyes, no calculation about applause or advancement. Only affirmation. When Sarah Jane glanced into the audience and found him, he met her gaze and smiled, a deep, quiet smile that reached his eyes. He nodded once, the same way he had when she was younger, standing in a church aisle or a school auditorium, reminding her without words, "You did what mattered." In that moment, his pride outweighed the roar of any crowd. And Sarah Jane felt it settle in her chest, stronger than cheers, steadier than approval. By the end of day 3, the weight of the competition finally revealed its purpose. The judges returned to the stage together, faces composed, voices careful. When the announcement came, it was clear this round was not about survival anymore. It was about selection. Only 4 contestants would move forward. Names were called one by one, each met with a sharp intake of breath, quiet gasps, restrained applause. When Sarah Jane's name was spoken, she closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself as relief and responsibility arrived at the same time. This wasn't just advancement. It was arrival. Backstage, the reality settled quickly. Each of the top 4 contestants was informed they would receive 2 to 3 contract offers, some from established producers, others from labels, management firms, or strategic partnerships. No spectacle. No grand promises spoken aloud. Just folders, meetings, and words like leverage, trajectory, and timing. There was a deadline. 6 business days. 6 days to decide the direction of a career that could define decades. 6 days to weigh exposure against protection, speed against sustainability, control against opportunity. Lawyers would be called. Families consulted. Faith tested. Sarah Jane held the weight of it quietly. This wasn't about winning a competition anymore. It was about choosing who would help shape her voice, her image, her future, and who would be trusted to handle something sacred. As the arena lights dimmed and contestants filtered out, one truth became undeniable. The real competition had just begun. Later that day, the house felt unfamiliar to Sarah, too quiet for everything that had happened. Sarah Jane sat at the dining table between her parents, folders spread out like an unsolved puzzle. 6 offers. 3 tune the amount that was promised sat in front of her with 6 possible futures. Each offer was neatly packaged, professionally worded, and heavy with implication. Logos, letterheads, timelines, promises. No one spoke at first. Her mother skimmed one document slowly, lips pressed together. Her father adjusted his glasses and reread another, this time more carefully, as if looking beyond the words to what they meant. Sarah Jane leaned back in her chair, arms folded, eyes moving from page to page without really landing anywhere. "I don't even know where to start," she finally said. "That's understandable," her father replied calmly. "These aren't small decisions." Each offer pulled in a different direction. One promised rapid exposure, but little creative control. Another emphasized development but demanded patience and silence. One leaned heavily into mainstream appeal. Another hinted at faith-based roots but with vague terms and unclear ownership. Some sounded exciting. Others sounded safe. None felt simple. Her mother reached across the table and placed her hand over Sarah Jane's. "Remember," she said gently, "every yes is also a no to something else." Sarah Jane nodded, the weight of it settling deeper. For the first time since the auditions began, fear crept in, not of failure, but of choosing wrong. The dining table, once a place for ordinary meals and easy conversation, had become a labyrinth of uncertainty. This wasn't just paperwork. It was her voice, her values, her future. 6 offers lay open before them, and none of them came with a clear answer. Her father leaned back in his chair, folding his hands thoughtfully as he looked at the spread of papers. "We don't have to figure this out tonight," he said calmly. "But we do need help." Sarah Jane looked up. "What do you mean?" "I think we bring in a lawyer, someone who understands the music industry, to walk you through each contract line by line," he said. "Not just the money or the timelines, but the ownership, the clauses, the things that don't jump out right away." Her mother nodded in agreement. "And," her father added, his voice firm but gentle, "I also think you should sit with one of your spiritual mentors. Someone who knows you, who knows your walk. Because no opportunity is worth it if it asks you to compromise your faith." The room grew still again. Sarah Jane exhaled. "I am afraid that slowing things down would mean losing something." Her father smiled softly. "The right doors don't disappear when you take time to walk through them wisely." She looked back at the contracts, seeing them differently now. These were decisions that required both wisdom and alignment. This wasn't just about signing an agreement. It was about protecting who she was, before the world tried to define her for her. The phone rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through the stillness that had settled over the dining table. Everyone froze. Sarah Jane glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing at the unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello. Good evening, Sarah Jane Parker," a polished voice said smoothly. "My name is Layla Brooks. I'm the personal assistant to Jamal Jackson, owner of Penny Studios." Her parents exchanged a look. Layla continued, her tone efficient but practiced. "Mr. Jackson is a longtime admirer of emerging talent, and your name has come across his desk following the auditions. He asked that I personally reach out." Sarah Jane swallowed. "Okay. There's an industry event happening tonight," Layla said. "Private. Invitation only. Executives, producers, artists. Mr. Jackson would like to extend an invitation to you as his guest." The room felt smaller suddenly. "We've arranged transportation," Layla added, as if anticipating hesitation. "A car can be at your location within the hour to pick you up and bring you directly to the venue." Sarah Jane's eyes drifted to the folders still open on the table, contracts, clauses, futures waiting to be chosen. "My parents are here," she said carefully. "I'd need a moment to." "Of course," Layla replied smoothly. "Take your time. I'll need confirmation shortly, but this is simply an opportunity to be seen. No commitments. Just presence." The line went quiet, waiting. Sarah Jane ended the call and slowly set the phone down. Her father spoke first. "They move fast." Her mother nodded. "And they don't call without intention." Sarah Jane looked between them, heart pounding, not with excitement alone, but with awareness. This wasn't just a ride to an event. It was a test. Of boundaries. Of discernment. Of how easily access could blur into obligation. Somewhere beyond the dining room walls, the industry was already knocking, ready to escort her into rooms she had only imagined. The question now wasn't whether the door was opening. It was how she would walk through it. Sarah picked up the phone again, her fingers steady despite the thrum in her chest. She dialed the number back, listened as it rang once, twice. "This is Sarah Jane," she said when Layla answered. "I'd be honored to attend." There was a brief pause, satisfaction masked as professionalism. "Wonderful," Layla replied. "The car will arrive shortly. I'll text you the details." The call ended, and for a moment Sarah Jane simply stood there, phone still in her hand. Her mother rose first, pulling her into a tight embrace. "We're proud of you," she whispered, pressing a kiss to her temple. Her father followed, resting his hands on her shoulders before kissing her forehead. "Remember who you are," he said quietly. "Rooms don't define you." "I know," Sarah Jane said, though her voice caught just slightly. She turned down the hallway toward her bedroom, the familiar creak of the floor grounding her as she closed the door behind her. Her closet stood open, rows of sensible dresses and understated outfits lining the rack, things chosen to blend in, to stay safe. Then her eyes landed on it. Her prom dress. It still hung in its garment bag, carefully preserved, the fabric rich and expressive, catching the light even through plastic. She hesitated. That night had been one of the few times she'd allowed herself to be fully seen, bold color, elegant lines, confidence stitched into every seam. "This is ridiculous," she murmured to herself. And yet, it felt right. She slipped it out, holding it up in the mirror. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't shy either. It carried memory, intention, a version of herself that had once stepped into a room believing she belonged there. Sarah Jane changed slowly, smoothing the fabric, fastening the back, studying her reflection. The girl looking back at her felt familiar and knew all at once, poised, vulnerable, ready. A knock sounded faintly from the front of the house. She took one last breath, squared her shoulders, and reached for her shoes. Tonight wasn't just about being invited. It was about showing up as herself, even if her heart beat just a little faster while she did. When Sarah Jane opened the door, she stopped short. 3 strangers stood on the porch, dressed in sleek black, each holding a compact bag filled with brushes, bottles, and tools that gleamed under the porch light. "Sarah Jane Parker?" the woman in front asked with an easy smile. "Yes," Sarah Jane replied. "We're here to do your hair and makeup," she said. "Courtesy of Penny Studios." For a brief moment, Sarah Jane registered the absence of her parents. They were already gone, their hugs and last words still fresh. She stepped aside and let them in, and suddenly the calm of the evening gave way to motion. Bags were set down, lights adjusted, tools warming. The dining table, still scattered with contracts and folders, became a makeshift glam station in seconds. Voices overlapped softly, efficient and assured. "Okay, we'll start with skin." One stylist studied her face thoughtfully. "You've got a great natural look," she said. "We'll keep it clean. Polished, not overdone. Hair can go soft waves, something that moves. This dress is perfect. Expressive, but not loud. Energy filled the rooms, bouncing off the walls, replacing hesitation with momentum." Sarah Jane caught her reflection in the mirror as brushes swept across her face and fingers moved through her hair. Everything happened quickly now, decisions made without debate, confidence borrowed from the people around her. The house hummed with anticipation, like the moments before a performance when everything aligns and time seems to move faster. When they finally stepped back, one of them turned the mirror toward her. Sarah Jane barely had time to process the reflection before a voice said, "Cars outside." She grabbed her coat, heart racing, not from fear, but from the thrill of being swept into something unfolding faster than she ever imagined. The night was no longer waiting. It had arrived. The moment Sarah Jane stepped outside, she saw it. The limousine waited at the curb like a held breath, long, sleek, and impossibly black, its polished surface swallowing the glow of the streetlights and reflecting the quiet of the neighborhood back at itself. The windows were tinted so dark they looked almost liquid, giving nothing away about what waited inside. As she approached, the soft hum of the engine reached her ears, low, steady, controlled. Not loud, confident. The kind of sound that suggested it could move at any moment without warning. The driver stepped out smoothly, shoes clicking once against the pavement before going still. When he opened the door, warm air spilled out, carrying the faint scent of clean leather, citrus, and something deeper, woodsy, expensive, unfamiliar. It wrapped around her instantly, a sharp contrast to the cool night breeze brushing her bare arms. The interior lights glowed dim and amber, revealing plush leather seats that looked more like furniture than transportation. Her fingertips grazed the edge as she stepped in, smooth, cool at first, then warming beneath her touch. The door closed behind her with a soft, decisive thud, sealing the world outside away. Inside, the sound shifted. The neighborhood disappeared. Even her own breathing felt louder for a moment before the quiet settled, thick, insulated, intentional. She could faintly hear the low bass of music already playing, felt more than heard, vibrating gently through the floor. As the limousine pulled away, the motion was nearly imperceptible. Streetlights slid past the tinted glass like streaks of gold, blurred and distant. The air was perfectly balanced, not too warm, not too cool, and when she leaned back, the seat seemed to mold to her shape, holding her there. Sarah Jane inhaled slowly, taking it all in, the scent, the silence, the motion, the weight of where she was headed. This wasn't just a ride. It was a threshold. As the limousine merged into traffic, Sarah Jane exhaled slowly, pressing her back into the leather seat. For the first time since the knock at the door, there was nothing required of her, no decisions, no performances, no one watching. Just motion. She adjusted the hem of her dress, the fabric whispering softly against her legs, and glanced at her reflection in the tinted window. The city lights slid across the glass, briefly illuminating her face before dissolving into streaks of gold and white. She barely recognized the woman looking back, not because she was different, but because she seemed. Arrived. A small chime sounded, subtle and deliberate. A screen embedded in the partition lit up, displaying a single message. Welcome, Sarah Jane. Penny Studios Industry Mixer. Private event. Her pulse quickened. A moment later, a voice came through the speakers, smooth, measured. Miss Parker, will arrive in approximately 12 minutes. If there's anything you need, please let me know. Thank you, she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The music shifted slightly, still low, still restrained, setting a rhythm that matched the movement of the car. Sarah Jane folded her hands in her lap and closed her eyes briefly, centering herself the way she had before stepping on stage. Remember who you are, her father's voice echoed in her mind. When she opened her eyes, the skyline had changed. Taller buildings now. Brighter lights. The air outside felt alive even through the glass. The limousine slowed, then turned, passing through a private gate that opened silently before them. It stopped. The driver stepped out and opened her door. Sound rushed in all at once, voices, laughter, music spilling from somewhere unseen. Warm light poured onto the pavement. Ahead of her stood the entrance to the venue, guarded but welcoming, where silhouettes moved with purpose and confidence. Sarah Jane placed one foot onto the ground, then the other. As she rose from the limousine, she felt it, the unmistakable sense that she had crossed into a room where things happened quietly, quickly, and forever. Whatever waited beyond those doors, one truth settled in her chest. There was no going back to who she had been before tonight. Jamal Jackson seemed to appear out of thin air. One moment Sarah Jane was taking in the scene, the next he was beside her, already speaking, already moving. He gently took her by the arm with the ease of someone who assumed familiarity, not arrogantly, but confidently, as though they had known each other far longer than a single phone call allowed. Sarah Jane, right? He said, smiling as if the answer were obvious. I'm glad you made it. Before she could fully respond, he was already guiding her forward. He moved effortlessly, efficiently, parting conversations and bodies without ever stopping. People turned as they passed, some nodding, some smiling, some pausing mid-sentence to take a second look. Doors opened. Pathways cleared. The waiting ground bent around him as if it knew his authority. Sarah Jane's heart raced. She was starstruck and dumbfounded all at once, her senses struggling to keep up with the pace. As they walked, her eyes darted from corner to corner of the venue. Everywhere she looked, there was someone recognizable. New artists she'd heard climbing the charts. Veterans whose voices had shaped entire eras. Runway models glided past in sculpted elegance. Actors laughed in tight circles, effortless and polished. Athletes, tall, commanding, leaned casually against walls, fame worn like second skin. The room pulsed with money, influence, and momentum. Conversations overlapped in quick bursts, deals hinted at, collaborations teased, futures discussed in fragments. Jamal leaned in slightly, his voice calm amid the noise. Just stay with me, he said. Tonight is about being seen, not overwhelmed. Sarah Jane nodded, gripping the strap of her small clutch to steady herself. Her feet kept moving, but her mind was spinning. This wasn't just a party. It was an ecosystem, and she had just been ushered into its center. Braxton lit up the moment he saw her enter with Jamal. Mid-conversation he paused, then stopped entirely. Whatever point he had been making dissolved as recognition set in. He excused himself without hesitation, his body already angling toward them as he moved through the crowd with purpose. "Jamal," Aaron called out, a wide grin spreading across his face as he reached them. "I should have known." Jamal laughed, releasing Sarah Jane's arm just long enough to clasp Aaron's hand. "You always know," he said easily. Aaron turned to Sarah Jane, his expression warm, impressed, unmistakably pleased. "I was hoping I'd see you tonight," he said. "Seeing you walkin' like this," he shook his head slightly, smiling. "It makes sense." Sarah Jane managed a small smile, still processing the way her name now traveled in rooms before she did. Aaron leaned in just enough to be heard over the music. "You did something special in those auditions. People are talking already." Jamal glanced between them knowingly. They should be. The three of them stood there for a moment, conversation flowing, attention subtly gathering. Sarah Jane felt it again, that shift. The way proximity created perception. The way alignment signaled possibility. Whatever paths lay ahead, it was becoming clear, she wasn't just being noticed anymore. She was being positioned. Within half an hour, Sarah Jane had been introduced to 5 different artists, each encounter brief but charged, each conversation leaving a mark. One spoke animatedly about a stripped-down duet, his eyes lighting up as he described how her tone could carry a hook without overpowering it. Another leaned in close, lowering her voice as she floated the idea of a collaboration that blended genres, something timeless but daring. A veteran artist clasped Sarah Jane's hand a little longer than necessary and said, simply, "You don't come around often." The words began to repeat themselves, echoing from mouth to mouth as if rehearsed. Range. Control. Discipline. Someone mentioned breath work. Another marveled at her restraint. More than once, she heard it said with awe and no small amount of reverence, that her voice could reckon with the greatest of all time. Sarah Jane smiled, nodded, thanked them, gracious, composed, but inside she felt unmoored. Compliments like these were intoxicating, dangerous in their sweetness. She was keenly aware that admiration in this room came quickly and often carried expectation. Jamal stayed nearby, never hovering, always watching. Occasionally he would step in just long enough to redirect a conversation, subtly steering it away from promises and into possibility. Aaron checked in once, giving her a knowing look that said, "This is only the beginning." As the night unfolded, Sarah Jane realized something quietly profound. People weren't just curious about her voice. They were already imagining what it could do for them. And as flattering as that was, it sharpened her awareness. Talent had brought her into the room, but discernment would determine how long she stayed, and who would be allowed to walk beside her once the lights dimmed. For now she breathed, listened, and remembered who she was, anchored even as the world began to reach for her. As the night deepened, the energy of the venue shifted. The main event of the evening, a curated artist showcase, was announced quietly but with unmistakable authority. Conversations tapered off. Drinks were set aside. People began drifting toward the central space, where a sleek, minimalist stage glowed under low amber lights. The lineup featured underground artists, names not yet household, but dominant in their own charts, their tracks circulating heavily through streaming platforms, late-night radio, and word-of-mouth. This was the edge of the industry where sound was tested before it was polished. One by one, artists took the stage. A rapper delivered verses sharp and unapologetic, his cadence cutting through the room with surgical precision. A neo-soul singer followed, her voice smoky and raw, the crowd swaying instinctively as if pulled by muscle memory. An alternative Randy B artist layered harmonies over a live loop, building something hypnotic and intimate. Sarah Jane watched closely. This wasn't about spectacle. There were no pyrotechnics, no elaborate choreography. Just talent, confidence, and the unspoken understanding that everyone in the room mattered. Applause came in nods, raised glasses, murmured approval, currency more valuable than cheers. She felt Jamal lean in slightly. "Pay attention," he said softly. "This is where sound tells you where it's going next." As the final artist stepped off stage, the room buzzed, not loudly but purposefully. Deals would be discussed later. Names exchanged. Futures rearranged. And somewhere in that charged atmosphere, Sarah Jane sensed it. Soon, the spotlight wouldn't just be something she watched. It would turn slowly, deliberately toward her. The next morning arrived without mercy. Sarah Jane was barely awake when her phone vibrated against the nightstand, the sound cutting through the shallow sleep she'd only slipped into hours earlier. Sunlight pressed through the curtains, far too bright for someone who had walked through her front door at 4 in the morning. She squinted at the screen. An unfamiliar name. An unfamiliar confidence. She answered, her voice still rough with sleep. "Hello. Good morning, Sarah Jane Parker," the man said crisply. "This is Maxwell Johnson from Maverick Artist. I hope I'm not calling too early." She glanced at the clock. 8:57 a.m. No, she started, then corrected herself. "It's fine." "I'll get right to it," Maxwell continued, all efficiency and polish. "We were made aware of your presence at last night's showcase. Word travels fast and favorably." Her stomach tightened. "I'd like to invite you to a meet-and-greet luncheon today," he said. "Private. Small circle. Industry creatives and executives. It'll be held at the country club just outside the city. Today." Sarah Jane pushed herself up in bed, the events of the night before rushing back in fragments, faces, voices, lights, Jamal's steady presence, the way people had spoken at her future. "What time?" she asked. "Noon," he replied smoothly. "Transportation can be arranged if needed." She murmured something polite, non-committal, and ended the call shortly after. When the line went dead, she let the phone fall back onto the bed beside her and stared at the ceiling. Barely 9 in the morning. She had been home for 5 hours. And the industry was already calling again, no pause, no buffer, no space to catch her breath. Invitations stacking on invitations. Opportunities dressed as urgency. Sarah Jane swung her legs over the side of the bed and rubbed her temples, feeling the familiar tension return, not excitement this time, but awareness. Last night had been about being seen. This morning was about being claimed. And somewhere between exhaustion and expectation, she knew she would need to decide, quickly, carefully, how much access she was willing to give, and how soon. Before Sarah Jane could give the decision any real thought, her phone chimed again. A text message. Maxwell Johnson, Maverick Artist, and address filled the screen. An upscale country club tucked behind manicured gates, the kind of place that didn't advertise itself because it didn't need to. Beneath it sat a sleek black-and-white QR code, stark and unmistakable. "This will be required for entry." A moment later, another message appeared. "See you at 12. No question mark. No invitation to confirm. Just assumption, confident, practiced, final." Sarah Jane stared at the screen, the weight of it pressing into her chest. It wasn't hostility. It was momentum. The industry's quiet way of deciding for you, of moving forward whether you were ready or not. She set the phone down slowly and ran a hand through her hair, exhaustion tugging at her bones even as adrenaline stirred beneath it. Last night had opened doors. This morning they were swinging wider, fast, eager, impatient. 12 o'clock was less than 3 hours away. She hadn't said yes. But according to the text, she already had. The Uber pulled up to the country club exactly at noon, tires crunching softly against the pristine gravel drive. Sarah stepped out slowly, letting the door close behind her as she took in the scene. The place was immaculate, rolling green lawns trimmed with surgical precision, white stone columns rising confidently against a cloudless sky. Everything about it whispered exclusivity, without ever raising its voice. She wore a white cropped top, clean and structured, paired with white denim jeans that fit her effortlessly. Her open-toe stiletto heels clicked sharply against the pavement, decisive, unapologetic. It wasn't a flashy outfit, but it was intentional. Crisp. Modern. Confident. Her hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail, exposing her face fully, no place to hide. The makeup from the night before still lingered, soft definition around her eyes, a subtle glow on her skin, just enough to suggest continuity, as if she hadn't fully stepped out of the world she'd entered hours earlier. She paused for a moment, adjusting the strap of her bag, feeling the sun warm her shoulders. Fatigue tugged at her body, but adrenaline held her upright. Alert. This wasn't a red carpet. This wasn't a stage. This was a different kind of performance, one measured in conversation, posture, restraint. Sarah lifted her phone, the QR code glowing on the screen, and began walking toward the entrance. Right on time. The dining hall opened before Sarah Jane like a carefully curated illusion of ease. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, spilling across polished hardwood floors that reflected the glow like still water. Crystal chandeliers hung low and deliberate, catching the light and scattering it softly across the room. The air carried a subtle blend of freshly cut citrus, brewed coffee, and warm bread, clean, restrained, expensive. Round tables draped in crisp white linen were spaced generously, never crowded, each set with fine china edged in gold, linen napkins folded with practiced precision. Low arrangements of pale flowers, ivory roses and soft greenery sat at the center of each table, chosen not to distract but to reassure. Muted conversation hummed through the space, measured laughter, the gentle clink of silverware, voices kept intentionally low. Jackets were draped casually over chair backs. Watches flashed briefly as hands gestured mid-sentence. No one rushed. Everyone belonged. Sarah Jane's heels made a soft, rhythmic sound as she stepped inside, momentarily cutting through the ambient murmur. That was when Maxwell saw her. He was standing near the far end of the room, mid-conversation, one hand resting on the back of a chair. The moment his eyes landed on her, something shifted. His words trailed off. His posture straightened. Recognition flickered, quick, sharp, satisfied. He excused himself smoothly, already moving in her direction, a practiced smile settling onto his face. "Sarah Jane," he said as he approached, his tone warm but appraising. "Right on time." His eyes took her in, not lingering, not rushed, cataloging presence, confidence, composure. The outfit. The ease. The fact that she had arrived alone. "Glad you could make it," he added, gesturing toward the room. "This is exactly where I wanted you to be." As he led her further into the dining hall, conversation subtly paused, then resumed. Heads turned just slightly longer than polite. Sarah Jane felt it again, that familiar sensation of being noticed without being announced. Maxwell leaned in just enough for her to hear. "People are already curious." She nodded, matching his pace. The room hadn't changed. But now it was watching her. Midway through the luncheon, Maxwell rose from his seat and gently tapped his glass with a fork. The sound was soft but commanding, cutting cleanly through the low murmur of conversation. Chairs shifted. Voices faded. All eyes turned toward him. Maxwell smiled, lifting his glass. "I won't keep us long," he said smoothly. "But moments like this deserve acknowledgement." He turned slightly, gesturing toward a table near the windows. "First, I want to recognize the Artist of the Year on our label. Your discipline, growth, and consistency have set a standard, not just for Maverick artists but for this industry." Applause followed, measured, respectful, confident. Maxwell continued, his tone warm. "Second, I want to welcome our newest signed artist to the Maverick family. Fresh voice, fearless sound, and a future we're excited to help shape." Another round of applause rose, glasses lifting briefly in acknowledgement. Then Maxwell's gaze shifted. "And finally," he said, pausing just long enough to shift the air in the room, "I want to toast our special guest today." Heads turned. Conversation stilled again. "Sarah Jane Parker," Maxwell said clearly. "You stepped into this industry with grace, restraint, and undeniable talent. It's rare to meet an artist so early in their journey who already understands presence." Sarah Jane felt the room settle on her. "We're honored to have you with us today," he continued. "And while nothing is promised and nothing is rushed, I hope that one day you might consider becoming part of the Maverick Artists family." He lifted his glass toward her. The room followed. A sea of raised glasses shimmered in the light, crystal catching sunlight and reflection. The response was polite but affirming, applause rippling outward, glasses clinking gently together, nods exchanged across tables. Approval without pressure. Recognition without commitment. Sarah Jane lifted her glass in return, offering a composed smile as she absorbed the moment. This wasn't a contract. It was a public invitation. And everyone in the room had just witnessed it. It was then that Sarah Jane noticed Dietrick Almond. He stood near the edge of the room, partially obscured by a column, a glass held loosely in his hand. He clapped along with everyone else, respectful, measured, but his expression told a more complicated story. His jaw tightened briefly, a subtle grimace passing over his face before he smoothed it away. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. Sarah Jane felt it immediately, the weight of what had gone unsaid. Maverick Artists had produced some of the most respected gospel artists in the nation. But so had Dietrick. His reputation for developing voices with integrity, patience, and spiritual grounding was well known. And he had been the first to approach her. The first to speak to her not about speed or exposure, but about stewardship. She wondered if he was disappointed that she hadn't called yet. The thought tugged at her, unwelcome but persistent. She shifted slightly in her chair, fingers tightening around the stem of her glass, then forced herself to breathe. It had only been one day since the auditions closed. And she was on day one of a 6-day decision window that everyone, including Dietrick, knew she was entitled to. No promises had been made. No decisions delayed in bad faith. Still, the moment lingered. Sarah Jane lowered her gaze briefly, centering herself. This luncheon wasn't a betrayal. It was information. Exposure. Discernment in real time. She reminded herself that wisdom didn't move on guilt, it moved on clarity. When she looked up again, Dietrick was still watching, his expression now composed, unreadable. Whatever disappointment he felt, he carried it with restraint. Sarah Jane raised her glass once more, joining the room in quiet acknowledgement, even as her thoughts raced beneath the surface. The invitations were multiplying. The eyes were watching. And every choice, even the ones she hadn't made yet, was already being interpreted. She steadied herself. There was still time. By 4 o'clock, the luncheon had begun to thin, conversations tapering into quiet handshakes and lingering promises. Sarah Jane gathered her things, relief and fatigue settling in at the same time. Maxwell intercepted her just before she reached the exit. "I've got a car waiting for you," he said easily, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "I can't have my future potential artist taking an Uber after one of my engagements." The words were light, almost joking, but intentional. Sarah Jane thanked him, offering a composed smile, and allowed herself to be escorted out. A black sedan waited at the curb, engine humming softly, door already opening. She slid inside, the door closing behind her with quiet finality. As the car pulled away, the country club disappeared in the rear window, manicured lawns giving way to city streets. There was no stop at home. No pause to decompress. Her destination was already set. She headed to her home first, and then straight to the lawyer's office her parents had arranged just days before. Thank God, she thought. If they hadn't followed through, she wasn't sure when she would have found the time. Her calendar, once open and flexible, was now filling itself faster than she could respond. By the time the car slowed in front of the office building, Sarah Jane felt the weight of the day settle fully into her shoulders. Luncheons, toasts, invitations, assumptions, each one layered atop the last. She stepped out of the car, adjusted her bag, and took a steadying breath. The industry had been loud. Now it was time for something quieter. Protection. Clarity. Wisdom. She walked toward the entrance, knowing that whatever decisions lay ahead, this meeting, this pause, might be the most important one yet. The lawyer didn't waste time. He adjusted his glasses, flipped open his notebook, and looked directly at Sarah Jane before she could even ask her first question. "I'm going to be very clear," he said. "2 of these deals are non-starters." He slid the folders forward one at a time. "The first is Penny Studios," he said evenly. "And the second is Money Masters." Sarah Jane's stomach tightened. "These contracts are designed to move fast and lock you in early," he continued. "They require long-term exclusivity, disproportionate ownership of your masters, and creative control clauses that would limit what you can record, where you can perform, and even more concerning, how your image and message are used." He tapped the page lightly. "In plain terms, you would lose leverage before you've even fully entered the market." Sarah Jane leaned forward. "Even with their reach?" "Especially because of their reach," he replied. "Powerful companies don't need to be predatory, but some choose to be. These deals assume urgency will cloud judgment." He paused, letting that sink in. "There's also no language here protecting your values," he added. "No moral clauses that work both ways. No safeguards if you're pressured into content, collaborations, or branding that conflicts with your faith or identity." Sarah Jane exhaled slowly. "So, it's a no," she said quietly. "It's an absolute no," the lawyer confirmed. "You don't grow careers by surrendering them." He closed those 2 folders and set them aside decisively. "Now," he said, turning to the remaining offers, "the others are worth discussing. Carefully. Thoughtfully. On your timeline." For the first time all day, Sarah Jane felt the pace slow. The noise of the industry, the lunches, the limousines, the toasts, faded into the background. What remained was clarity. 2 doors had closed. And somehow it felt like betrayal. Not because the lawyer was wrong, she knew he wasn't, but because faces were now attached to those doors. Voices. Handshakes. Smiles that had felt sincere only hours earlier. Invitations that came wrapped in warmth, but carried expectation beneath them. Penny Studios meant Jamal's effortless confidence, the limousine, the stylists at her door, the way he'd guided her through rooms as if she already belonged. Saying no felt like undoing that moment, like rejecting the hand that had pulled her forward. Money Masters meant access, speed, the promise of immediate elevation. Turning it down felt like stepping out of alignment with an industry that prized momentum above all else. She sat back in the leather chair, staring at the closed folders on the lawyer's desk. They looked smaller now. Harmless. But she knew better. "Betrayal isn't always personal," the lawyer said gently, reading her expression. Sometimes it's just business that feels personal. Sarah Jane nodded, but the weight lingered. She thought of Dietrick, his early faith in her, his emphasis on stewardship. She wondered if he would see this as wisdom or delay. She wondered how many bridges closed quietly the moment a deal was declined. Yet beneath the discomfort, something steadier held. She hadn't betrayed anyone. She had protected herself. Still, the realization settled slowly. Choosing herself would not always be celebrated. Some people would call it disloyalty. Others would call it foolish. Sarah Jane rose from her seat, gathering her things, her posture a little straighter now. If doors had to close, let them close honestly. The right ones, she reminded herself, would not require her to trade peace for access. And even if it hurt, she would walk forward anyway. That evening, just as the day finally began to loosen its grip on her shoulders, Sarah Jane's phone rang. She recognized the number immediately. "Hello," she said softly. "Sarah Jane," Dietrick said. She could hear it in his voice, measured, careful, carrying the weight of something he would have preferred not to say aloud. He wasn't calling to compete or persuade. He was calling because, in this industry, silence could be misread, and business, no matter how personal it felt, still required clarity. "I won't take much of your time tonight," he said. "I know you've been running." That alone caught her attention. "I wanted to see if you'd be open to breakfast tomorrow morning," he continued. "Early. Nothing formal. I figured after being out 2 days in a row, the last thing you'd need is another late evening." She smiled faintly, surprised. She hadn't mentioned her schedule. Hadn't explained the luncheon, the toast, the meetings stacked on meetings. Yet somehow he knew. "That's thoughtful," she said honestly. There was a brief pause on the line. Then, quieter. "I wanted to give you space. This is your window, not mine. But I also didn't want to let it pass without speaking to you face to face." The restraint in his tone told her more than urgency ever could. He wasn't rushing her. He was waiting with intention. "I'd like that," Sarah Jane said. "Breakfast sounds good." "Good," Dietrick replied, a hint of relief slipping through despite himself. "We'll keep it simple. 8 a.m. I'll send the address." When the call ended, Sarah Jane set the phone down and leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. 2 days into a 6-day decision window, and already she had been ushered into rooms, praised publicly, courted aggressively, and warned carefully. Yet this invitation, quiet, considerate, unassuming, felt different. This wouldn't be about spectacle, or positioning, or being seen. It would be about listening. And for the first time since the auditions ended, Sarah Jane felt ready for exactly that. Breakfast was, as Dietrick had promised, simple. The bistro sat at the edge of town, tucked near the shoreline where the air carried a faint trace of salt, and the steady hush of waves moving just beyond view. Morning light spilled softly across the patio, warming the wooden tables and catching on glassware. Seagulls passed overhead, their calls distant and unintrusive, blending naturally into the rhythm of the morning. They took seats outside, where a light breeze moved easily between them. The scent of fresh coffee, citrus, and warm bread lingered in the air. It was calm, intentionally so. No crowds. No cameras. No sense of urgency pressing in from every side. For a few moments, conversation stayed comfortably neutral. They spoke about the drive, the venue, how quickly the days had blurred together. Professional, polite, almost cautious. Sarah Jane noticed how Dietrick didn't rush to fill silences. He let the space exist, as if allowing the setting itself to do some of the work. Gradually the tone softened. They spoke about music, craft more than charts, discipline more than numbers. About longevity. About what happens after the applause fades. The conversation drifted easily between business and belief, ambition and responsibility, never fully settling into either. Sarah Jane wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, listening closely. This felt different from the luncheon, different from the showcase, different from every polished invitation she'd received so far. Here there was no spectacle. Just 2 people at a small table by the water, one with a gift still forming, the other with experience earned carefully, allowing the conversation to unfold at its own pace. And for the first time in days, Sarah Jane didn't feel pulled forward. She felt present. "Your contract speaks of creative license," Sarah said. "Can you explain that some more to me?" Dietrick didn't answer right away. He stirred his coffee once, then set the spoon down carefully, as if choosing precision over speed. "I'm glad you asked that," he said. He leaned back slightly, eyes steady on her. "When my contract talks about creative license, it's not just legal language, it's protection." Sarah Jane nodded, encouraging him to continue. "It means you retain the right to say no," he explained. No to songs that don't align with your values. No to collaborations that feel forced. No to messaging that conflicts with your faith, your voice, or your sense of purpose. He paused, then added, "It also means you're not boxed into one sound. Gospel, classical, inspirational, crossover. You're allowed to explore without being penalized for growth. Your voice doesn't belong to a trend. It belongs to you." She wrapped her hands more tightly around her mug. "So I wouldn't need approval for every artistic choice?" "You'd have guidance," Dietrick clarified, "not control. I believe in partnership. We discuss direction, timing, strategy, but you're not silenced or overridden. If something doesn't sit right with you, we stop. Period." Sarah Jane looked out toward the water for a moment, letting that settle. "I've seen artists lose themselves," he continued quietly. "Not because they lacked talent, but because they signed away their discernment. Creative license keeps your discernment intact." She turned back to him. "And if the market wants something I don't?" Dietrick met her gaze without hesitation. "Then we wait. Or we pivot. Or we build something new. Success that costs you peace is too expensive." The breeze lifted slightly, fluttering the corner of a napkin between them. Sarah Jane nodded slowly. "That helps," she said. "A lot." Dietrick smiled, not triumphant, not relieved, just steady. "That's the point," he replied. That afternoon, Sarah Jane made her way across town to meet with her spiritual mentor. The church sat quietly on its corner, sunlight filtering through the tall windows and casting soft patterns across the steps. It had been 5 weeks since Sarah Jane had last walked through its doors, 5 weeks of rehearsals, auditions, and a schedule that left little room for stillness. As she entered, the familiar scent of polished wood and quiet reverence settled around her, grounding her almost instantly. The First Lady was already waiting. She rose when she saw Sarah Jane, her smile warm and unhurried. They embraced, and Sarah Jane felt the weight she'd been carrying ease just slightly. "You've been moving fast," the First Lady said gently, not as a rebuke, but as a recognition. "I have," Sarah Jane admitted. They sat together in the sanctuary, the afternoon light stretching across the pews. Sarah Jane spoke about the auditions, the offers, the luncheon, the contracts that had already been dismissed, the pressure of choosing within days. Her words came measured but honest. "I don't want to choose wrong," she said. "And I don't want success to cost me my faith or my identity." The First Lady listened intently, hands folded, eyes steady. "Opportunity is loud," she said when Sarah Jane finished. "Calling can be quiet. The work is learning the difference." They prayed together, not hurried, not dramatic, asking for discernment, peace, and the courage to say no when necessary. Before Sarah Jane left, the First Lady placed her hands gently on her shoulders. "God doesn't rush what he intends to last," she said softly. As Sarah Jane stepped back outside into the afternoon light, the world still moved quickly around her, but inside, something had slowed. And that, she realized, was exactly what she needed. Her phone rang just as she reached her car. Sarah Jane glanced at the screen and felt her breath catch. Jennifer Gomez. She hesitated for half a second, long enough to steady herself, then answered. "Hello." "Sarah Jane," Jennifer said, her voice familiar and direct. "I won't keep you long." There was something different in her tone, less polish, more intention. "I heard you had a full day," Jennifer continued. "Luncheons, meetings, introductions. That tends to happen when people start paying attention." Sarah Jane smiled faintly. "It's been a lot." "I figured," Jennifer replied. "That's actually why I'm calling. I wanted to speak to you directly, before assumptions start doing the talking for us." The afternoon light filtered through the windshield as Sarah Jane listened. "I know you're in your decision window," Jennifer said. "And I respect that. I also know I'm not a producer, and I'm not here to offer you a contract." She paused. "What I am offering is perspective, and access on your terms." Sarah Jane shifted in her seat, listening closely now. "You don't owe anyone speed," Jennifer went on. "And you don't owe anyone loyalty for opportunities you haven't accepted. But you do owe yourself alignment." There was a quiet honesty in her voice that caught Sarah Jane off guard. "If you're open," Jennifer said, "I'd love to meet. Just the two of us. No handlers. No pressure. Coffee, maybe. I want to make sure you hear every option clearly, especially the ones that don't shout." Sarah Jane exhaled slowly. "I'd like that," she said. "Good," Jennifer replied, a smile audible even through the phone. "I'll let you set the pace. Call me when you're ready." The line went dead. Sarah Jane sat there for a moment, phone resting against her palm. 3 voices now, each different. Each intentional. Each waiting. And for the first time, she realized the choice ahead wasn't about who wanted her most, it was about who would walk with her best. As a celebrity, Jennifer Gomez was careful about where she was seen, and with whom. Coffee shops, quiet cafes, even discreet restaurants were still too public. Too many phones. Too many assumptions. Too much narrative created before a word could be spoken. So instead, the invitation came quietly and directly. Come to my home. We'll have coffee there. When Sarah Jane arrived, the setting immediately set the tone. Jennifer's home was elegant but lived in, warm wood floors, tall windows letting in natural light, shelves lined with books and awards placed without ceremony. Nothing screamed celebrity. Everything spoke intention. Jennifer greeted her at the door herself, dressed simply, hair pulled back, no entourage in sight. "This way," she said easily, leading her into the kitchen. Coffee brewed slowly, filling the room with a rich, familiar scent. They sat at a small table near the window, sunlight stretching across the surface between them. No contracts. No folders. No assistants hovering nearby. "This is why I wanted you here," Jennifer said, pouring the coffee. "Not because I'm hiding, but because I want to talk to you without noise." Sarah Jane nodded, feeling the difference immediately. "When people see me with someone new," Jennifer continued, "they start writing stories. About ownership. About favoritism. About alignment. I don't want that for you. Not before you've chosen your path." She met Sarah Jane's eyes directly. "This isn't about visibility. It's about clarity." Sarah Jane wrapped her hands around her mug, absorbing the weight of that care. For the first time since the auditions ended, the conversation ahead didn't feel like a pitch. But in no time Sarah noticed it was a pitch, just a quieter one. Sarah Jane realized it slowly, not from what Jennifer said outright, but from what she chose to emphasize. Jennifer spoke warmly, almost admiringly, about money matters, calling them aggressive in the right ways and excellent at accelerating momentum. She smiled knowingly when she mentioned Jamal Jackson, describing him as a visionary, a maker of stars, someone who understood how to move culture. Two very different worlds, she admitted, but in her telling, both were powerful, both effective, both worth aligning with. Her praise was generous. Strategic. What Sarah Jane noticed most, however, was the silence. Jennifer said nothing about Dietrick Almond. Not a critique. Not a comparison. Not even a passing acknowledgement. The omission felt deliberate. Sarah Jane stirred her coffee slowly, listening as Jennifer spoke about leverage, reach, and timing, about how certain alliances opened doors faster than others. The words were polished, carefully chosen, wrapped in mentorship language. But beneath them, Sarah Jane felt a quiet discomfort settle in her chest. It wasn't that Jennifer was wrong. It was that she was aligned. Aligned with worlds that thrived on speed, on optics, on power structures that rewarded early commitment and public association. Worlds where being seen together meant something, even when the meeting happened behind closed doors. Sarah Jane nodded politely, thanked her for the perspective, but inwardly she was recalibrating. Jennifer's smile never faltered, but Sarah Jane understood now. This wasn't neutrality. It was positioning. Jennifer wasn't against her, she was for certain teams. And those teams were not the ones that had first spoken to Sarah Jane about stewardship, patience, or protection. When Sarah Jane left Jennifer's home, she felt sharper and more aware. She hadn't been pressured, but she had been guided subtly, skillfully, toward a direction that did not fully sit right with her spirit. Jennifer spoke of the quick rise to stardom and financial freedom, but there was no assurance of remain in a person of integrity or as one's self. And for the first time, Sarah Jane understood something crucial. Not every offer is wrong. Some are simply wrong for the right person. Sarah Jane understood that now with a clarity that surprised even her. The rooms she had entered were not evil. The people were not villains. Influence, money, speed, none of it was inherently corrupt. It just carried a cost that not everyone was meant to pay. She wanted fame, yes, but not at the expense of respect. She wanted creativity, but not without ownership. She wanted success, but never at the cost of her faith. What she was seeking didn't fit neatly into one lane. It required patience in an industry addicted to urgency. It required reverence in spaces that thrived on spectacle. It required people who understood that her voice wasn't just an instrument, it was an extension of who she was. Sarah Jane wasn't naive. She knew compromise was inevitable in any career. But surrender was not. And that distinction between bending and breaking was becoming her compass. As her 6-day window narrowed, she felt something steady beneath the noise. A growing confidence that the right partnership would not ask her to choose between who she was and who she could become. Fame could come. Respect had to stay. Faith was non-negotiable. And creativity, true creativity, would flourish best in a space that honored all three. For the first time since the auditions ended, Sarah Jane didn't feel torn. She felt decided, if not on who, then on what. And that, she knew, would make all the difference. On the night of day 5, just when the noise of the week had begun to dull into a low, constant hum, Sarah Jane received another message. This one felt different immediately. It wasn't polished or urgent. No car promised. No assumptions made. A small, newly acquired label, one that specialized primarily in neo-soul and jazz artists, reached out personally. The message was brief, respectful, almost understated. They were hosting an album release party for one of their artists, and wanted to extend an invitation. No pitch. No expectations. Just presence. Sarah Jane reread the message twice. Neo-soul. Jazz. Genres rooted in musicianship, phrasing, breath, restraint. Spaces where vocal control mattered more than spectacle. Where storytelling lived in nuance, not volume. She noticed something else too. There was no pressure to decide anything. No mention of contracts. No language about locking her in. Just an invitation to listen. The contrast was striking. After 5 days of being pulled into rooms where futures were discussed before relationships were formed, this felt almost gentle, curious instead of consumptive. Sarah Jane sat quietly for a moment, phone resting in her hand, thinking about the conversations she'd had, about creative license, stewardship, alignment. About fame that didn't eclipse respect. About faith that didn't need to be hidden to be marketable. This invitation didn't promise reach. But it hinted at craft. She replied yes. Not because it was the loudest door, but because it was the only one that hadn't tried to claim her before truly knowing her. As she got ready that evening, Sarah Jane realized something subtle but important. This might not be the room that decided her career. But it could very well be the room that revealed how she wanted to build it. The venue felt like a quiet coronation the moment Sarah Jane stepped inside. Low light washed the room in hues of deep amber and honeyed gold, as if the walls themselves were glowing from within. Velvet drapes framed tall windows, their fabric heavy and indulgent, pooling softly at the floor. The ceiling hung low enough to feel intimate, but high enough to let the music breathe. Nothing echoed. Everything lingered. The air carried layers of scent, burning sage, aged wood, espresso, and something floral and smoky, like jasmine caught in candle heat. Every table was set deliberately. Small, round, dressed in dark linens, crowned with single candles in glass holders that flickered gently, casting soft shadows across faces and hands. The seating felt intentional rather than crowded. Leather banquettes curved around the edges of the room, worn just enough to feel welcoming. Chairs were mismatched in a way that felt curated, mid-century lines beside plush modern silhouettes. Gold accents caught the light subtly, a rim on a table, a lamp base, the edge of a mirror. At the front, the stage was modest but commanding. A grand piano sat slightly off-center, its lid open like an invitation. A stand-up bass rested nearby, polished and patient. Microphones gleamed under soft spotlights, not harsh, not theatrical, ready for voices meant to be heard, not shouted. Cables were visible, unapologetic, grounding the elegance in authenticity. The crowd moved differently here. Voices stayed low, laughter warm and unforced. Artists leaned in close when they spoke, hands expressive, eyes attentive. There were nods instead of applause, hums of approval instead of cheers. People dressed with confidence rather than flash, silks, linen, natural textures, jewelry chosen for meaning rather than shine. It felt like a room where craft was currency, where singers were measured by breath control and phrasing, where musicians listened as much as they played, where presence mattered more than popularity. Sarah Jane felt it immediately, the difference. This wasn't a place to be discovered by accident. It was a place you were invited into because someone believed you would understand it. As she took it all in, she realized something quietly profound. This room didn't ask her to perform. It compelled her and invited her to belong. This room didn't ask her to perform. It compelled her. Not with pressure or expectation, but with invitation, soft, insistent, undeniable. The kind that settles in the chest and tugs gently, like a familiar melody you didn't realize you'd been carrying all along. The music drifting through the space wasn't loud, but it was alive, woven into the walls, into the pauses between conversations. Sarah Jane felt it in the way voices leaned into silence instead of filling it. In the way musicians closed their eyes when they listened, as if sound itself were sacred. in the way no one rushed to be seen because everyone there already was. Her fingers flexed at her sides instinctively, as though reaching for a microphone that wasn't yet in her hand. She didn't feel watched. She felt welcomed. This wasn't a stage demanding proof. It was a room that recognized readiness. A space where expression wasn't extracted, it was drawn out, gently, respectfully. Sarah Jane inhaled slowly, the scent of wood and candle smoke filling her lungs, and understood something without needing it explained. Here, her voice wouldn't be used. It would be received. And that realization, quiet, steady, compelling, made her heart begin to sing long before her mouth ever opened. Jean Faux noticed her. At first, it was subtle, the way her head tilted slightly with each chord change, the way her lips moved almost imperceptibly. But then he caught it. Every song he sang, she hummed an undertone of her own. Not competing. Not echoing. Harmonizing instinctively, as if her voice already knew where his was headed. From the stage, as Jean belted his notes into the warm, waiting air, his eyes kept finding her. She stood near the edge of the room, unaware of the attention she was drawing, completely absorbed. Her eyes were half closed, her body still, her expression reverent. She wasn't watching a performance. She was listening with her whole self. Jean smiled mid-phrase. By the end of the set, he stepped back from the microphone, breath steady, room hushed in appreciation. He scanned the crowd once more, then lifted a hand. "Come here," he said, voice easy, almost playful but intentional. A ripple moved through the room as his gaze landed squarely on Sarah Jane. She froze. Jean laughed softly. "Yes, you've been singing with me all night." A few heads turned. Murmurs followed. Someone smiled knowingly. Sarah Jane hesitated, heart pounding, then took a few careful steps forward. The crowd parted without resistance. When she reached the stage, Jean extended his hand and helped her up with effortless grace. "This is my album release," he said to the room. "But music isn't meant to be hoarded." He turned to her. "What's your name?" "Sarah Jane," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "Well, Sarah Jane," Jean said, stepping aside and offering her the microphone. "Let's make this honest." The room held its breath. An unsigned nobody, no label, no announcement, no introduction, now stood beside the artist of the night, under lights that suddenly felt warmer, closer. And as Sarah Jane lifted the microphone, she realized something profound. This moment hadn't been engineered. It hadn't been negotiated. It had been recognized. And whatever happened next, it would happen the only way that mattered, through the music. Their voices melted together, as though they had practiced for years. It happened instantly, no cue, no count-in, no searching. Just instinct. The moment Jean reached the chorus, Sarah Jane understood the shape of it, the space between the notes, the breath beneath the melody. She didn't follow him, she met him. She slipped into the alto beneath his tenor with effortless precision, grounding his belt with warmth and depth. Where his voice rose, hers wrapped around it, steady and sure. Then, as the phrase shifted, she lifted seamlessly, threading soprano lines through his alto, light but unwavering, like silk woven through linen. The room changed. People leaned forward without realizing it. Conversations stilled. Glasses paused midair. What they were hearing wasn't impressive, it was right. Balanced. Natural. As if the song had always been waiting for both of them. Jean glanced at her mid-phrase, eyes widening just slightly, a grin breaking through as he adjusted, trusting her, giving her room. They breathed together. Paused together. Built together. No one could tell who was leading anymore. The harmony swelled, not loud, not forced, but full, layered, alive. Every note landed where it belonged, each voice amplifying the other without overshadowing it. By the final chord, the sound lingered, suspended, complete. Silence followed. Not because the room didn't know what to do, but because everyone knew they had just witnessed something rare. Two voices. One moment. And a truth that could not be manufactured. Sarah Jane lowered the microphone slowly, heart racing, breath steady. This wasn't an audition. This wasn't opportunity knocking. This was calling answering calling, and the room had heard it. Cameras flashed. Not loudly at first, one phone lifted, then another, but within seconds the room glimmered with screens catching light, angles, proof. Someone near the bar whispered, "Who is she?" A clip was already being posted before the final harmony fully faded. Social media lit up in real time. Short videos. Blurry but electric. Captions typed in haste. "Who is the girl singing with Jean Faux? This harmony is insane. She came out of nowhere." Notifications stacked. Views climbed. The moment escaped the room before anyone could decide what it meant. Jean stepped back, laughing softly in disbelief, shaking his head as if he'd just discovered something for himself. He leaned into the mic once more. "Y'all just met Sarah Jane," he said simply. "No résumé." No explanation. That was enough. Applause rose, different from competition applause, different from polite industry approval. This was recognition. Spontaneous. Earned. A response that didn't need permission. Sarah Jane felt it all at once, the heat of the lights, the weight of attention, the hum of momentum igniting around her. And for a fleeting second, she understood how easily moments like this could sweep someone away. But beneath the flash and noise, something else anchored her. This hadn't been orchestrated. No contract had prompted it. No strategy had manufactured it. It was music meeting music. As Jean guided her gently off stage, phones still lifted and eyes still tracking her movement, Sarah Jane felt the shift, not just in the room, but in herself. Amanda Phoenix was waiting for her at the bottom of the stage. She stepped forward with an easy confidence, her smile warm and unguarded, as if this moment had been anticipated rather than improvised. She took Sarah Jane's hand briefly, firm, affirming. "Thank you for coming tonight," Amanda said, her eyes bright with sincerity. "That was special." Sarah Jane smiled back, still catching her breath, the echo of harmonies lingering in her chest. "I'm really glad to see how comfortable you already feel here," Amanda continued. "Like you belong." She paused, then added gently, "Because that matters to us." There was no pitch in her tone. No urgency. Just invitation. "We'd love to have you at future events if that's something you'd like," Amanda said. "No pressure. Just know the door's open." Sarah Jane nodded, touched by the simplicity of it. "I'd like that," she replied honestly. Amanda's smile widened, satisfied but unpossessive. "Good. Then this won't be the last time." As Amanda moved back into the crowd, Sarah Jane stood for a moment, taking it all in, the ease of the exchange, the absence of expectation, the way welcome had been offered without condition. For the first time since the auditions, opportunity hadn't felt like pursuit. It felt like belonging waiting patiently. Sarah Jane knew she had to be honest with Dietrick about the night at Amanda Phoenix's event, about the stage she hadn't planned to step onto, about how quickly everything was moving even when she wasn't trying to make it move at all. She called him the next morning. "Dietrick," she said after they exchanged brief pleasantries, "there's something I need to tell you before we go any further." He was quiet on the other end, attentive. "Go ahead." "I attended an album release last night," she said carefully. "A neo-soul and jazz label. I didn't go intending to sing. I didn't go looking for attention. I didn't even go thinking that that label could be a possibility." She paused, choosing truth over polish. "But I was invited on stage by the artist of the night. It happened organically. And I feel like that place, that space, that company is the music family that I am intended to be a part of." There was a breath of silence, long enough for her to wonder how it would land. "Thank you for telling me," Dietrick said finally. His voice was steady, but she could hear the weight beneath it. "Not everyone would have made that call." "I didn't want you to hear it from anyone else," she added. "Especially not online." "That matters," he replied. "And for what it's worth, being invited into music honestly isn't something to apologize for." She exhaled, relieved. "But," he continued gently, "these moments have a way of becoming narratives fast. And narratives can push decisions before hearts are ready." "I know," Sarah Jane said. "But I honestly feel that if they present me with a contract as honest and careful as yours, I would take it." Dietrick nodded, though she couldn't see it. "That tells me you're still leading with discernment. One night away doesn't change who you are, or what I heard in you." There was a brief pause, then a softer note entered his voice. "I don't need exclusivity before understanding. I need honesty. And you gave me that." Sarah Jane felt her shoulders relax. "Whatever you decide," Dietrick said, "I want it to be a decision you can stand in, without explaining yourself later." When the call ended, Sarah Jane sat quietly for a moment, phone resting in her hand. Truth hadn't cost her ground. If anything, it had strengthened it. The truth settled in Sarah Jane's heart with surprising calm once she finally named it. She wanted Dietrick, not for speed, not for optics, but for formation. She wanted his wisdom, his discipline, his insistence on stewardship. She trusted the way he listened before he spoke, the way he centered growth over gain. She wanted him as part of her personal development as an artist, the place where voice, faith, and identity were shaped slowly and protected carefully. But she also wanted Amanda Phoenix's neo-soul family. That room. That sound. That way of belonging without possession. What she felt there wasn't ambition, it was resonance. The neo-soul and jazz space allowed her voice to breathe, to explore texture and phrasing without performance anxiety. It honored musicianship. It welcomed her without rushing her into definition. It felt like community, not consumption. For days she had been told, directly and indirectly, that she would have to choose one world or the other. But Sarah Jane was beginning to understand something deeper. Her calling was not singular in expression, even if it was singular in purpose. She didn't want to be split. She wanted to be integrated. Dietrick could walk with her in the private places, vocal discipline, spiritual grounding, long-term vision. Amanda's circle could hold her in the public, creative places, collaboration, exploration, sound rooted in soul and honesty. One did not cancel the other. What mattered was order and clarity. Sarah Jane wasn't trying to build a career out of fear anymore. She was building it out of alignment. And alignment, she was learning, often required courage, not just to say no, but to say yes differently. When she finally spoke it aloud, to herself first, it felt less like conflict and more like truth. She didn't want to belong to a machine. She wanted to belong to a movement. And she was ready at last to explain that clearly, respectfully, and without apology. The day of decision arrived with a gravity unlike any other. By mid-morning, the Metropolitan Arena was alive again, not with auditions or applause, but with quiet tension. The remaining contestants filed in one by one, dressed with intention, faces composed, each carrying a choice that would alter the trajectory of their lives. There were no numbers this time. No performances. Just names and decisions. Sarah Jane walked in slowly, taking in the space where it had all begun. The lights felt softer now. The echoes different. She found her seat among the finalists, her posture steady, heart calm in a way that surprised her. The noise of the week, meetings, pitches, praise, pressure, had finally settled into clarity. This wasn't about who wanted her most. It was about where she would grow best. Jennifer sat upright, composed. Aaron leaned back, watchful. Adrianna folded her hands, calm. Dietrick arrived last, his expression steady, unreadable. An official stepped to the front of the arena. "Today," he said evenly, "you will declare your decisions. There is no right choice here, only the one you are prepared to live with." Names were called. One by one, contestants stepped forward. Some announced major label deals, their voices lifting with relief and pride. Applause followed, measured, congratulatory. Others spoke of management contracts, development agreements, strategic partnerships. Each declaration closed a door as much as it opened another. With every announcement, the room grew quieter. Seats emptied. Futures aligned. Possibilities narrowed. Sarah Jane remained seated. She listened, not just to the words but to the tone behind them. She felt the weight of finality settle deeper with each choice spoken aloud. She didn't rehearse her own statement. She didn't need to. The decision had already settled inside her. At last, only one name remained uncalled. Sarah Jane Parker. The sound of it echoed more than she expected. She stood slowly. The walk to the center of the arena felt longer this time, each step deliberate, grounded. She felt the eyes of the judges on her, not curious now, but attentive. Dietrick's gaze held steady, open. Somewhere behind the rows of seats, Amanda Phoenix watched quietly, saying nothing. Sarah Jane stopped at center stage and took a breath, not to steady herself, but to honor the moment. "I want to begin with gratitude," she said, her voice calm and unhurried. "This process introduced me to rooms I never imagined standing in, and to people who saw something in me before I fully understood it myself." She paused. "But more than opportunity, this journey clarified who I am." The room stilled. "I am choosing a path that prioritizes growth over speed," she continued. "Formation over exposure. Integrity over urgency." She lifted her gaze. Jennifer shrugged her shoulders at that declaration. "I will enter into a development partnership focused on my personal and artistic growth, while remaining independent in my creative expression and collaborations." A low murmur moved through the arena, a bit of confusion, and some recognition. "This decision allows me to honor my faith, protect my voice, and build a career that lasts," she said. "It may not be the loudest choice, but it is the truest one for me." She nodded once, then stepped back. The silence that followed was longer this time. Dietrick inclined his head, pride quiet but unmistakable. Jennifer's expression softened, thoughtful. Adrianna smiled. Aaron rubbed his eyes slowly. Aaron's voice cut through the remaining quiet, firm, not unkind. "So, Sarah," he said, leaning forward, "what is this decision? Be clear and be decisive." Sarah Jane didn't flinch. She let a beat pass, not to stall, but to steady the room. "Yes," she said simply. "I understand. She lifted her chin and spoke so there could be no confusion. "I am signing a development and production agreement with Dietrick Almond," she said, voice calm and certain. "He will oversee my vocal development, artistic formation, and long-term strategy." A soft stir moved through the arena. "And," she continued, "I am not signing with Penny Studios, Money Masters, or any other agency. I am declining those offers." She paused just long enough to let the words land. "I will remain independent as an artist while I collaborate creatively within Amanda Phoenix's neo-soul and jazz community, by invitation, project by project, without exclusive obligations." Her gaze moved across the judges, then returned to Aaron. "That is my decision," she finished. "Dietrick for development and grounding, Amanda for independence and creativity, and my faith for my foundation." The arena, once built for noise, held still, as if the space itself were processing what had just been said. This wasn't a standard declaration. It didn't fit the usual headline. There was no logo flashing behind her name, no single label claiming victory. Aaron was the first to move. He leaned back in his chair, nodded once slowly. "That's clear," he said. "And it's rare." Adrianna exhaled with a small smile, her hands coming together in a quiet clap that grew into applause. Jennifer followed, then the rest of the judges. The sound spread outward, measured but sincere, until the room filled with it. Dietrick stood. He didn't rush. He didn't smile broadly. He simply rose to his feet, straightened his jacket, and met Sarah Jane's eyes. There was pride there, but more than that, responsibility. The kind you accept when you agree to steward something sacred. The official stepped forward again, voice steady. "The decision is accepted." That was it. No debate. No negotiation. The window had closed. Behind the scenes, things began to move immediately. Assistants whispered. Phones came out. Notes were made. Somewhere in the upper rows, Amanda Phoenix watched with a knowing smile, already understanding how this choice would echo quietly through the rooms she occupied. Sarah Jane returned to her seat, her breath finally releasing. The tension she'd been carrying for days slipped from her shoulders. Not because everything ahead was easy, but because it was aligned. As the finalists were dismissed, Dietrick approached her, not as a judge now, but as a partner. He extended his hand, firm and steady. "We'll move slowly," he said. "And we'll move right." Sarah Jane took his hand. "I'm ready," she replied. And for the first time since her number had been called at the start of this journey, the path ahead didn't feel like a gamble. It felt like a calling, answered deliberately, and on her own terms. In that moment, a verse she had carried since childhood rose up in her spirit with quiet authority. "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" She had first heard it clearly at 10 years old, standing barefoot beside the baptismal pool, water cool against her ankles, heart pounding with a certainty far bigger than her small frame. That verse had guided her steps then, and now, years later, it steadied her again. It had kept her grounded when applause grew loud, when rooms grew bigger, when opportunity came wrapped in temptation. Sarah Jane felt it settle over her like confirmation. She knew her parents would be proud, not because she had chosen the safest path, but because she had chosen the truest one. She was proud of herself too, not for resisting success, but for redefining it. And above all, she knew God would be proud. He had not created her to move in rooms filled with content that diluted her convictions, nor to lend her voice to messages that hollowed out her spirit. He had not shaped her gift to be consumed quickly and discarded just as fast. He had created her to carry something: truth, beauty, reverence, and to release it without losing herself in the process. As the arena slowly emptied and the moment passed into memory, Sarah Jane stood firm in the knowledge that she had gained something far more valuable than access or acclaim. She had kept her soul intact. And with that, she walked forward unhurried, unshaken, and wholly herself into her version of stardom. I hope you liked this story. Before you go, share what part of the story stayed with you. And why? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Now, follow and stay tuned. Also, stay faithful as you continue to experience God's daily grace.